The smell of smoke never really leaves you. Even after the firefighters are gone, after the cameras stop flashing, it lingers, like a ghost made of ash and regret. That night, when I stood in front of what used to be my home, the air still carried the burnt echo of everything I had ever loved. The house was gone. My husband's laughter, our quiet mornings, the life we built one slow sunrise at a time, and all gone. And then, 3 weeks later, the woman responsible for it walked into my courtroom wearing designer heels and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She strutted through those double doors like she owned the very oxygen in the room. Her perfume hit me before her name did. Citrus, confidence, and the kind of arrogance that money buys when it's never been told no. Bryn Ashworth Sterling, president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association, and the arsonist who just burned down a federal judge's house. She didn't know it yet, but that fire didn't destroy me. It forged something far more dangerous. A judge with nothing left to lose. I am Judge Miriam Blackwood, and this is the story of how I buried a queen, legally, publicly, and permanently. 3 months earlier, back before the flames, before the headlines, before the word arson started echoing in my skull, I was just a woman trying to live through grief. My husband Harold had been gone 6 months. Cancer, slow, merciless, and clinical. After 28 years of marriage, I'd learned how silence could be louder than grief itself. Our house, a 1940s craftsman tucked in the Colorado foothills, had turned into a museum of memory. Every chair still faced his side of the fireplace. His reading glasses still waited on the nightstand like he might pick them up any second. Even his favorite bourbon, unopened, untouched, untouchable. That morning, I decided to keep a promise, build the privacy fence Harold and I had planned during his final months. He used to call it our wall of peace. 6 feet tall, cedar wood, strong enough to block the world but gentle enough to let in the wind. The scent of sawdust and roses filled the yard as I worked. For a moment the ache quieted. Then came the sound that would mark the beginning of my war. The click whip of a measuring tape being pulled. "You must be the widow." That was how she greeted me. Not hello, not "I'm sorry for your loss." Just that cold assessment. Like she was inspecting a property listing. I looked up and found her standing at the edge of my lawn. Mid-40s, flawless hair, silver Tesla parked diagonally across my driveway like a declaration of dominance. Designer sneakers, mirrored sunglasses, clipboard in hand. "Judge Blackwood," I corrected, wiping the soil from my palms. She tilted her head, the way people do when they want to pretend they care but actually don't. "Right. The judge." She said it like a diagnosis. "I'm Bryn Sterling, HOA president. We have a problem." Then she snapped the tape measure open again, click whip, and extended it across my brand new fence. 6 foot 2 inches, she announced, pursing her lips. "Regulations clearly state a 6-foot maximum. You'll need to bring it down, or face a fine." Her words hung there, smug and sweet. I stared at her for a long second, the way I used to stare at defendants who thought they were smarter than the law. "Show me that regulation," I said quietly. Her perfectly manicured fingers flipped through her leather portfolio, the pages rustling like nervous excuses. She found nothing. Of course she didn't, because no such rule existed. I had hired a licensed surveyor to make sure every inch of that fence was compliant. Bryn's smile faltered. "Well," she sniffed, "we'll see about that, Judge." And with that she turned on her heel and walked away, pink tape measure glinting in the sunlight like a weapon. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about fences. It was about control. And Bryn Ashworth Sterling had just chosen the wrong woman to bully. That evening I microwaved leftover lasagna and sat at Harold's old desk. The computer's glow washed over stacks of unpaid bills and sympathy cards. For the first time in months I felt something other than grief, anger. Out of habit I typed Sterling into the county court database. And there it was. 3 years ago, Sterling Premium Builders and her husband's company had stood before my bench for contractor fraud. They'd tried to swindle an 80-year-old veteran out of $30,000 for a fake roof repair. I'd slammed them hard, restitution, fines, and a referral for criminal investigation. Revenge. That's what this was. I leaned back in Harold's chair, the smell of his pipe tobacco still faint in the cushions, and whispered to the empty room, "You just declared war on the wrong person, Mrs. Sterling." The first certified letter arrived 3 days later, then another, and another. 7 in 10 days, all from the Pinewood Estates HOA violation number 1. Unauthorized decorative structure. Apparently Harold's memorial stone, a simple granite marker that read "In memory of love that grows eternal," was offensive to the uniform landscape aesthetic. Violation number 2, mailbox color inconsistency. Mine was black, the same as every other mailbox on the street for the last 30 years. Violation number 3, excessive bird feeding creating nuisance conditions. That one made me laugh, and then it made me cry. Harold loved cardinals. Every morning he'd watch them flutter near the feeder while sipping coffee. After he died, feeding those birds became my ritual, my way of pretending he was still there. Now even that small piece was being fined at $200 per day. Bryn wasn't enforcing community standards. She was trying to break me. But here's the thing about picking a fight with a federal judge, we don't scare easily, and we document everything. I started a file, then a spreadsheet, then a binder thicker than a Bible. I photographed every corner of my property, every letter, every envelope, every postmark. I printed out HOA bylaws, highlighted discrepancies, annotated false citations. I even created a timeline of harassment events. Each page felt like armor. The more I dug, the more I saw the pattern. Her fines were illegal, not just immoral. Colorado HOA statutes required reasonable fines tied to actual violations, and hers referenced rules that didn't exist. I'd sentenced murderers with more subtlety than this woman. So I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Real Estate Commission, citing her procedural violations and fraudulent documentation. Then I sat back in Harold's chair, exhaled the first real breath of relief I'd had in months, and whispered, "Checkmate, Bryn," only the game was just beginning. Thursday morning, while I was downtown sentencing a DUI offender, my security cameras captured Bryn's next masterpiece of stupidity. She arrived at my property with her entourage, a skeletal interior designer in white linen and a muscle-bound trainer holding a clipboard like it was a diploma for 2 full hours. They paced my yard, pointing at Harold's roses, scribbling fake notes and snapping photos of imaginary violations. It was performance art for sociopaths. That evening I watched the footage on repeat, frame by frame, zooming in on their smug expressions as they fabricated evidence. In my courtroom, we called that conspiracy to commit fraud. And that's when I knew this wasn't just harassment. It was organized crime hiding behind an HOA letterhead. By the time the 7th violation letter landed on my porch, my patience was hanging by a legal thread. Every envelope came stamped urgent. Final notice, written in that corporate font that tries to look official but mostly screams insecurity. Each one reeked of perfume, citrus, and control, the same scent Bryn wore the day she measured my fence. But this time, something new was tucked inside. A court summons. Pinewood Estates HOA versus Miriam Blackwood. The accusation? Refusal to comply with community standards and creating a hostile environment for HOA officials. It was the kind of absurdity that made me laugh out loud. A federal judge accused of being a public nuisance in her own neighborhood. That's like charging a surgeon for practicing medicine too neatly. Still, I knew the tactic. She was forcing me into court on my own battlefield, hoping the irony would sting more than the outcome. Fine. She wanted a courtroom? She'd get one. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Outside, Pinewood's clubhouse looked like a luxury day spa. White pillars, manicured hedges, and a banner advertising community harmony through accountability. Inside, it smelled like air freshener-covered fear. Bryn stood at the front like a movie villain pretending to be PTA president. Her entourage, the same interior designer and the clipboard bodybuilder, flanked her on either side, their eyes darting nervously when I walked in wearing my black robe. "I didn't think you'd show up in uniform," Bryn said, smirking. "Oh, I never attend kangaroo courts out of dress code," I replied. Her grin faltered. They expected a grieving widow. They got a judge ready for war. The HOA board chair, a man named Dennis with a tan so fake it could testify, cleared his throat. "We're here to resolve community concerns peacefully," he began, voice trembling just enough to betray guilt. I placed a thick binder on the table, my evidence file, and the thud echoed like a gavel. "Peacefully," I said, "sounds good to me. Why don't we start by reviewing your so-called regulations?" Bryn's manicured nails drummed against her folder. She glanced around, trying to find allies in the room, but all she saw were neighbors too terrified to speak. I opened to page 1. According to Colorado HOA Statute 3833-3302, subsection 1b, an association's rules must be properly adopted, published, and approved by majority vote. These, I flipped through their forged documents, weren't. Dennis swallowed. The room shifted. Bryn tried to recover. You can't just quote the law at us. I leaned forward, voice low, steady, lethal. Bryn, I am the law. Silence. Only the faint buzz of the air conditioner and the sound of her confidence evaporating. When the so-called hearing adjourned, I left my binder on the table, opened to the page marked evidence of fraudulent fines. Let them read. Let them sweat. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. A woman's voice, an older, quivering button, whispered, Judge Blackwood? Please, help us. She's been doing this to everyone. That was the first call. Then came another. And another. Within a week, I had 9 messages. All from Pinewood residents. Elderly, single mothers, immigrants. People Bryn had cornered and humiliated until they either paid up or sold their homes. It wasn't an HOA anymore. It was organized extortion wearing yoga pants. That's when I stopped thinking like a victim and started working like a prosecutor. Harold used to say, justice isn't an emotion. It's a process. And I was about to run that process like a machine. Every night my living room turned into an evidence lab. Folders, photos, timelines, witness statements. The smell of coffee replaced the smell of fear. Walt Henderson, my retired teacher neighbor, became my right-hand man. He'd lived in Pinewood since 1965 and remembered when people helped each other repaint fences instead of fining them for the wrong shade of beige. She's been bleeding folks dry, he told me, voice thick with anger. Rodriguez family got hit with 800 in fines for a garden statue. Single mom across the street fined for her kid's chalk art. She said it ruined the aesthetic. The pen in my hand snapped. Bryn's campaign wasn't personal vendetta. It was systemic discrimination. I'd seen white-collar crime before, but never in a cul-de-sac with flower beds. Once I mapped out every complaint, a picture formed, a network of intimidation tied directly to HOA funds. The fines weren't going to maintenance or landscaping. They were being laundered through Sterling Premium Builders, her husband's company. Every violation was a false invoice. Every repair was a shell transaction. I traced transfers, cross-checked signatures, pulled property tax reports. And there it was, over $300,000 missing from community accounts. Harold would have smiled, the kind of proud smile he gave me whenever I cracked a tough case. Now I had motive, method, and evidence. All I needed was timing, but Bryn wasn't done. When bullies sense resistance, they don't retreat. They escalate. The next attack was personal. I came home late from court one evening to find my back gate swinging open. The air felt wrong, too still, too quiet. I called out for Gavel, my old tabby cat, but the yard answered with silence. Security footage showed Bryn on my property again, trespassing in daylight, taking photos through my kitchen window. When she left, she deliberately unlatched the gate. An hour later, her landscaping crew arrived with industrial leaf blowers. The noise must have terrified Gavel. He bolted into the street and vanished. 3 days later, a vet called. He'd been found in a storm drain, ribs broken, dehydrated, barely breathing. The vet said his injuries matched machine pursuit trauma. She hadn't just broken the law this time. She'd broken the last piece of my heart. I sat beside his oxygen tent, stroking his matted fur, whispering promises I intended to keep. Hang on, Gavel. Mama's gonna make sure she pays for every breath you fight for. That night I filed 2 charges, criminal trespass and animal cruelty. Then I sent the footage to Channel 7's investigative reporter, Sarah Morgan, a journalist known for turning corrupt politicians into primetime villains. By the next evening, the headline hit every screen in Colorado, Judge versus HOA when watchdogs attack. Bryn had wanted attention. Now she had it, from the Attorney General, 3 law firms, and the entire online world demanding justice for Gavel. The night the story broke, my phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, lawyers, strangers, everyone wanted a piece of the scandal that had just exploded across the state. Headlines blazed through every news feed. Show up president targets federal judge. Justice turns personal. It wasn't just local gossip anymore. It was national fuel. But for me, it wasn't about fame. It was about fury. I sat in my dark kitchen, the blue light from my phone flickering across the photographs of my burned fence and my injured cat. Gavel purred faintly beside me, recovering, a fragile heartbeat that kept me from collapsing. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. The world finally saw what this monster had done. Not just to me, but to an entire community she'd been quietly terrorizing. And the best part? Bryn Ashworth Sterling had no idea how deep this fire was about to burn. Channel 7's report aired on a Thursday night, prime time. Sarah Morgan stood outside Pinewood Estates, microphone steady, voice clear, exposing every violation, every illegal fine, every resident's nightmare behind her. Neighbors gathered like a chorus of truth. Old men, young mothers, people who'd been silenced for years. They were finally speaking. Finally free to name the villain who'd hidden behind a homeowner's badge and a fake smile. When Sarah's voice cracked slightly while describing Gavel's injuries, I knew the country would feel what I felt. The pain, the injustice, the raw violation of safety. Within hours, social media lit up like wildfire. Justice for Gavel trended #1 in Colorado. Petitions poured in demanding state investigation into HOA corruption. But what came next shocked even me. 3 law firms offered pro bono representation within 24 hours. The Colorado Attorney General's office requested all my documentation. And ordinary people and strangers started sending letters. Judge, we saw your story. We've been through the same thing. Please teach us how to fight back. Make them pay for all of us. I realized something huge that night. This wasn't just my battle anymore. It was everyone's. But villains don't vanish quietly. They double down. 3 days after the report, a certified letter arrived. Official judicial stationery, embossed, legitimate. It was a complaint to the Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission, filed by Bryn Ashworth Sterling. The accusations were outrageous. She claimed I had abused my position, used my title to intimidate homeowners, and weaponized the legal system for personal revenge. It was pure fiction, written with the confidence of a sociopath who believed her lies would outshine my truth. And she didn't stop there. Bryn leaked the complaint to political blogs known for attacking female judges. By sunset, I was trending again, this time under the headline, "Activist Judge Abuses Power to Terrorize HOA President." The comment sections turned into bonfires. Keyboard soldiers called me corrupt, tyrannical, dangerous. They said I deserved to be removed from the bench. It didn't matter that my record was spotless, or that I'd sentenced actual criminals who'd done less harm than Bryn. Public opinion doesn't care about evidence. It cares about spectacle. For 72 hours, my career hung by a thread. But then the truth knocked on my door. Literally. She looked like someone's grandmother. Silver hair, sensible shoes, a cardigan that had seen better days. But her eyes, they belonged to someone who'd spent decades reading confessions before people even spoke them. "Judge Blackwood," she said, smiling softly. "I'm Patricia Donnelly. You can call me Pat." She handed me a manila folder thick enough to choke a defense attorney. "I think you'll want to see this before your next hearing." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I used to play cards and plan our garden. Now it was covered in documents, photographs, and crime scene precision. Pat's fingers moved with the calm of a veteran assembling a weapon she'd built 100 times before. "I used to work for the FBI," she said. "Financial Crimes Division. Retired but not tired." Then she tapped a photograph, Bryn's face smiling in front of a half-built mansion. "Meet Bethany Sterling of Phoenix, Arizona," she said. Same face, different name. Next photo, Rebecca Ashworth, California. Next, Sandra McKenzie, Detroit. All Bryn, all aliases, each one tied to an HOA. Each community destroyed by mysterious fires and budget shortfalls. Pat looked up, eyes narrowing. "She's not just a bully, Judge, she's a professional predator. I've tracked her across 4 states. Insurance fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. Every few years she changes her name, burns down a neighborhood, and cashes out." I felt my chest tighten. "You're saying she's done this before?" "And she's about to do it again, right here. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got." Bryn's husband's company, Sterling Premium Builders had just filed for bankruptcy. 2 months earlier, their business license had been suspended for tax evasion. Her HOA presidency wasn't about neighborhood pride. It was about access. Control over community emergency funds, which she'd been quietly draining. Pat spread out bank statements and insurance papers across the table like a general planning a war. "Here's where it gets poetic," she said. "Your house, the one she's been harassing you about, is insured for double its market value, thanks to those electrical upgrades your husband made before he passed." I frowned. "What are you saying?" "She's planning to burn it down, Judge, and when it spreads to her property, she'll collect on both policies." The world tilted. For a moment I heard nothing but the hum of my refrigerator and the faint sound of Gavel's purring in the next room. "She planned this from the start," Pat continued. "The harassment, the trespassing, even the media noise. It's misdirection. She wanted you distracted while she set up her next payout." The floor felt cold under my bare feet. My grief twisted into something colder. Purpose. Harold used to say justice is about patience, not punishment. But some crimes demand both. For the next week, my home became a war room. Pat and I documented every piece of evidence: bank accounts, insurance policies, witness lists. Walt gathered neighbors, many of whom had fled Pinewood out of fear. Mrs. Rodriguez returned from Phoenix with photos, letters, and testimonies, everything Bryn had done to her family before forcing them to move. Single mothers, retirees, veterans, all came forward. Each one had been humiliated, fined, or evicted by Bryn's fake regulations. It wasn't just fraud. It was civil rights violation, systematic targeting of anyone she thought couldn't fight back. Pat's retired FBI instincts pieced it together faster than any active agent could have. "She's running a multi-state RICO operation," she said. "Organized crime hiding under a suburban zip code." We sent copies of the evidence to the Colorado Attorney General, the Treasury Department, and a federal fraud task force. The silence that followed wasn't ignorance, and it was planning. And I knew from experience that federal silence usually meant federal thunder was coming. Amid all the chaos, Gavel healed. His fur grew back. His purrs returned, steady and comforting. Each morning he'd sit by the window, tail flicking as if keeping time with my heartbeat. He'd survived her cruelty, and so had I. That cat became my symbol of survival, proof that even after fire and fear, life could still breathe again. Pat noticed one morning as we reviewed evidence. "He's your anchor," she said, smiling faintly. "Keep him close. This case is going to get uglier before it gets better." She was right, because Bryn Sterling was about to commit her biggest mistake yet, one that would turn her petty corruption into a federal-level nightmare. A week later, an anonymous tip reached Channel 7. A concerned resident claimed that Judge Miriam Blackwood's home was a public safety hazard due to faulty electrical work and unpermitted modifications. Sound familiar? Of course. When Sarah Morgan showed me the tip-off email, I knew exactly who'd sent it. The phrasing, the smug tone, even the use of the phrase for community protection. Pure Bryn. But what Bryn didn't know was that Pat had already wired my property with high-grade surveillance. Motion sensors, heat detectors, multiple hidden cameras, all fireproof encased. "Let her come," Pat had said days earlier, adjusting one of the cameras with a small smirk. "She's about to record her own arrest." And she was right. Because the next move Bryn made wouldn't just cost her reputation, it would cost her freedom. There's a certain calm before destruction. That haunting quiet that tricks you into thinking everything's okay. For a week, Pinewood Estates was silent. No letters, no calls, no pink tape measure flashing through my fence line, almost peaceful. Almost. But peace around Bryn Sterling was never real. It was just the deep inhale before the next explosion. The morning it began, the air itself felt different. Heavy. Metallic. The kind of pressure you sense before a thunderstorm or a confession. I remember stirring sugar into my coffee, the sunlight filtering through my kitchen blinds when the notification pinged on my phone. Motion detected. Backyard camera. I tapped the screen. And there she was, Bryn Ashworth Sterling in her perfect yoga outfit, walking through my gate like she'd been born there. Pink tape measure in one hand, clipboard in the other. the same props she'd always used to disguise her crimes as inspections. But this time, she wasn't measuring fences. She was taking photos of the ground, the soil, the electrical panels. And her husband wasn't far behind, hauling something heavy, a canister, silver and unmarked. Pat's voice played in my head like a warning bell. Let her come. She's about to record her own downfall. I zoomed in. The cameras caught everything. The way Bryn knelt, pressing her manicured hands into the dirt near my foundation. The way her husband connected a line from the canister into the soil. The way she smiled afterward. That same empty grin that had haunted my nights. They were planting accelerants. Fire trails designed to mimic an electrical fault. She was building the crime, scene she'd later pretend to discover. That evening, I met Pat and Walt in my living room. The lights were low. The only glow came from the monitors replaying Bryn's every movement. Pat leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her eyes sharp. She's not even trying to hide it anymore, she murmured. This is premeditated arson, textbook insurance fraud, and attempted murder given your residency. Walt rubbed his jaw, disbelief thick in his voice. She's really going to burn you out, Judge, just like she did those other towns. I nodded slowly. My pulse steady, my rage measured. She thinks she's writing her victory story. But all she's doing is signing her own confession. We had everything we needed. Timestamps, footage, witness statements, motive, and prior criminal pattern. But Pat wanted more. Let her come back, she said quietly. People like her always do. Arsonists revisit their work. To adjust, to admire, to feel powerful. She tapped the screen, pausing on Bryn's smirk. When she does, we'll have her with live surveillance and federal jurisdiction ready. We left the house exactly as she expected it. Dark, empty, unguarded. But what she didn't know was that it was now the most heavily monitored residence in Colorado. Hidden heat sensors. Thermal cameras, remote feeds patched directly into the state fire marshal's office and a federal database. Pat's old bureau contacts had pulled every favor they could muster. Even the mailbox across the street was wired with a covert lens. Feels like we're staging a sting on Al Capone, Walt whispered that night as we set up the last motion sensor. I gave him a grim smile. Close, but this one wears Lululemon instead of pinstripes. By midnight, the trap was ready. We sat in Walt's den, the glow of the monitors flickering like campfire light on our faces. Pat sipped cold coffee. She'll make her move tonight, she said. Her kind can't stand suspense. I stared at the live feed of my own backyard. The garden Harold and I had built together, now ground zero for an act of domestic terrorism. Do you ever stop feeling it? I asked quietly. The waiting? Pat shook her head. No. You just learn to breathe between the explosions. At 2:46 a.m., the feed shifted. Movement. A shadow crossed the fence line, then another. Unmarked white trucks pulled up with their headlights off. 4 men climbed out, not landscapers this time. They moved with precision, wearing industrial coveralls and carrying equipment that looked like something from a demolition site. Bryn stepped out behind them, calm, confident. She was directing them. Get the tank set up by the foundation, she said. We'll call the inspector once the smoke clears. Every word was caught by Pat's hidden microphones. Inside Walt's house, my fists clenched around the edge of the table. Pat whispered, got her. Keep recording. They laid down what looked like fertilizer pellets, but I knew better. It was chemical accelerant, disguised in landscaping material. One of the men connected hoses feeding propane lines toward my kitchen wall. They were designing a fire that would look electrical, spread to Bryn's property, and then trigger an insurance jackpot. The plan was surgical, evil in its efficiency, and then, right on cue, the irony arrived in a black SUV with Channel 7 News plastered on its side. Sarah Morgan, the same journalist who'd exposed Bryn weeks earlier, stepped out with a cameraman, confused, sleepy-eyed, clutching her press badge. And there she was, standing under the floodlights of her own criminal stage, playing hero. Community safety is my only concern, Bryn announced into the camera, her voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. It's tragic how some people refuse to follow inspection protocols. She was literally standing over her own accelerant trail while accusing me of negligence. Sarah's expression shifted, suspicion flaring in her eyes. She'd been lied to before, but never so blatantly. Pat whispered through the comms line. Keep rolling. We've got visual confirmation, audio, and time-stamped footage. Back at Walt's, my pulse pounded like a war drum. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every family she'd bullied, every home she'd burned, every life she'd ruined. Let her finish the act, Pat said softly. It's the last performance of her career. At 3:04 a.m., flashing red lights illuminated the street. A fire inspection vehicle pulled up, not by accident. Pat had contacted the state fire marshal's office hours earlier, warning them of a potential arson setup. And the man who stepped out was no rookie, Inspector Jake Morrison, 30 years in fire investigation, the kind of man who could smell gasoline through concrete. He approached the scene, calm and focused, his flashlight cutting through the dark. "Evening, folks," he said. "Got a report of fire hazards?" Bryn turned, all fake innocence and forced charm. "Yes, thank goodness you're here. This resident has—" He crouched down before she could finish, shining his light over the soil, tracing the thin glimmer of chemical residue leading directly to the propane line. The smell hit him instantly. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "This isn't fertilizer." Sarah's camera zoomed in. The entire scene was now being broadcast live. Bryn froze. Morrison stood, brushing dirt from his gloves. "Ma'am, are you aware that tampering with residential gas lines is a federal offense?" Her voice faltered. I was just trying to help." He reached into his jacket and clicked on his body camera. "Care to explain the envelope you just slid across my clipboard?" The air went still. Sarah's camera pivoted. Bryn's hand was halfway through, offering him cash. Caught. On tape. In 4K, Pat exhaled softly beside me, whispering the words that sounded like music. "Game over," Morrison's voice hardened. "You're attempting to bribe a state official, in the middle of an active investigation. You know what that means?" Bryn tried to stammer something, a denial, a plea, but her tongue failed her. The cameraman's flash caught the panic in her eyes, the same eyes that once glared at me over a fence. Certain she was untouchable. "Ma'am," Morrison said coldly, "you're under arrest." And with that, the illusion shattered. The Queen of Pinewood Estates, the self-appointed dictator of suburban perfection, was led away in Nightwing, handcuffs under the same lights she'd called for her own fame. The neighborhood gathered, silent at first, then whispering, then cheering. For the first time in months, I smiled, not out of victory but relief, because justice hadn't just arrived. It had shown up live on television. Back in Walt's den, Pat finally leaned back, exhaustion written across her face. "That," she said, "is what we call irrefutable evidence." I looked at the frozen image on the screen, Bryn being loaded into a cruiser, her empire collapsing behind her. And for the first time since Harold died, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind that can be broken by noise or memory, the kind forged in fire and tempered by justice. But I also knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. Because for people like Bryn Sterling, guilt isn't the last act. It's just the intermission before the courtroom. Dawn came slow and gray, the kind of light that feels like it's crawling over ashes. When I stepped outside Walt's house, the air still smelled of burnt fertilizer and diesel, evidence of Bryn's failure staining the morning. Police tape glittered across my lawn like yellow scars. Reporters hovered at the barricades, microphones raised, hungry for quotes. I didn't speak. I simply watched the cruiser where Bryn sat cuffed, mascara streaked, still pretending she could outtalk gravity. One officer approached. "Judge Blackwood, we'll need your statement in a bit. You're safe now." Safe. I'd forgotten what that word tasted like. Pat joined me, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes locked on the scene. "She'll make bail," she murmured. "People like her always do. But now the feds have jurisdiction. She won't run far." I nodded, watching technicians collect soil samples from the accelerant trail. Every scoop of dirt was another nail in her legal coffin. By mid-morning, state and federal agents swarmed the property. Thermal drones mapped heat signatures. Chemists bagged residues. The fire marshal's van buzzed with generators and screens. Inspector Morrison knelt beside the propane lines, gloved hands steady. "Professional setup," he said to the camera. "Accelerant laid for directional burn. Gas line tapped through irrigation. Whoever did this knew fire behavior." He paused, glancing at me. "They also knew you'd be home." Pat recorded everything on a secondary camera. "Intent to kill confirmed," she whispered. not just property damage. Inside the command van, Morrison pulled up the infrared footage from the night before. The images told a perfect story: ignition points, chemical fingerprints, timestamps, and, most damning, the moment Bryn handed him the envelope of cash. "This isn't going to plea out," he said flatly. "We're filing for attempted murder of a federal judge." The phrase hung heavy in the air. Attempted murder. It sounded biblical. Within 24 hours, the case shifted from state to federal control. The Department of Justice took over, assigning prosecutors from the Organized Crime and Fraud Division. The stack of charges read like a career obituary: attempted murder of a federal official, arson conspiracy, wire and mail fraud, money laundering, identity theft, civil rights violations. Pat grinned as she handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "Congratulations, Judge. You just launched the largest HOA fraud indictment in state history." I managed a tired smile. Not exactly the legacy I had in mind. "Legacies choose us," she said. "You just make sure they end right." By evening, the footage from Morrison's body cam hit national news. Viewers watched, jaws dropped, as Bryn tried to bribe a fire inspector while standing in the middle of her own crime scene. The clip went viral, 10 million views overnight. Anchors called it the HOA from Hell case. Talk shows dissected every frame. Late-night comedians joked about suburban dictators with measuring tapes. But the laughter didn't reach Pinewood. For the people she'd hurt, it was vindication, not comedy. Elderly residents left flowers on my porch. Kids drew chalk hearts on the sidewalk that once earned their families fines. For the first time, Pinewood Estates felt like a community again. Walt shook his head at the crowd outside. "You turned a courtroom case into a neighborhood resurrection." "No," I said quietly. "They did that. They just needed proof evil could bleed." Federal auditors combed through 5 years of HOA accounts. Every file they opened dripped corruption. Ghost vendors, forged bids, maintenance fees rerouted to shell companies owned by Bryn's aliases. Pat narrated the discoveries like a crime podcast host. "See this transfer? 93 grand labeled storm drain repair. Not a single invoice, no permit, but it matches the down payment on a Tesla in her husband's name." Investigators cross-checked the HOA's emergency fund. Over $340,000 gone, all routed through banks that had already flagged suspicious activity tied to Sterling premium builders. Each account, each withdrawal painted the same picture: fraud disguised as community care. When agents froze her assets, the number on the warrant made even me whistle: $4.2 million seized. 3 days later, the federal courthouse overflowed. Cameras flashed as marshals escorted Bryn inside wearing the beige jumpsuit of the recently dethroned. Her lawyer looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Judge Ramos, presiding, read the indictment aloud. With each charge, Bryn's shoulders sank further until her designer confidence cracked. The prosecutor's opening statement cut clean. "This is not a dispute over fences. It is a campaign of fraud, harassment, and attempted homicide orchestrated under the guise of neighborhood governance." I sat in the gallery beside Pat and Walt. Hearing someone else describe the nightmare out loud felt surreal, like watching a film of my own life. Only this time the villain didn't get to narrate it. When the judge denied bail citing flight risk and community danger, a collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. Justice wasn't just moving forward. It was sprinting. As federal agents dug deeper, more victims surfaced. Sacramento, Phoenix, Detroit, 3 communities, 15 families, identical patterns: harassment, fines, arson, insurance payouts, each under a different alias. A map filled one wall of the investigation room. Red pins where she'd struck, blue where she'd planned next. "She's a serial financial arsonist," Pat said, tapping the map. "Burns money and houses the same way: quick, clean, profitable." The DOJ assembled a multi-state task force. Every file we'd collected in my basement turned into federal evidence. What started as my personal revenge had become national reform. One night, after 10 hours of depositions, I came home to find a letter on my doorstep. No stamp, just handwriting I recognized: "Mrs. Rodriguez, Judge Blackwood. Thank you for giving our kids back their neighborhood." Inside was a photo. Her children drawing chalk flowers on the same driveway where Bryn once saw defacement. I pinned it to my fridge beside Harold's old court commendation. Two symbols of the same truth. Justice isn't a title. It's a fight you keep showing up for. The following week, Pat received a secure call. She mouthed the words FBI headquarters and handed me the phone. Judge Blackwood, the voice said, calm and professional. We'd like your cooperation on a national HOA fraud initiative. Your case has exposed a pattern we can't ignore. I almost laughed. So Pinewood becomes precedent? More like ground zero for reform, the agent replied. We'll make sure of it. When I hung up, Pat raised an eyebrow. Looks like you're about to testify on Capitol Hill. I smiled wearily. Harold always wanted me to go to Washington. He just didn't specify under what circumstances. A week before the grand jury trial, an explosion shook Pinewood at 3:17 a.m. My rebuilt security shed went up in flames, minor, contained, but deliberate. An accomplice trying to send a message. The cameras caught him, one of Bryn's hired arsonists sneaking in from the service road. This time, the federal marshals didn't wait for a warrant. By sunrise, he and two others were in custody, their confessions linking directly to Bryn's husband. Pat watched the footage, shaking her head. Idiots never learn. You cut off the snake's head and the tail still twitches. The attempt backfired spectacularly. New charges stacked, new witnesses turned state's evidence. Every spark they tried to reignite only lit up another spotlight of truth. Prosecutor Amanda Stevens, a woman with courtroom presence sharp enough to draw blood, called me in for prep. We've got her cornered, she said, sliding a thick file across the table. But the jury needs to understand the human cost. Not just numbers, lives. She studied me. Can you tell them what she took from you? I hesitated. Everything. My peace, my home, my husband's memory. But she gave me something too. What's that? Purpose, Stephen smiled. That's the testimony that wins cases. As the trial date neared, Pinewood transformed. Neighbors painted over years of fear. The HOA sign, once Bryn's emblem of control, was replaced with a new plaque. Pinewood Estates, a community of justice and restoration. Walt was elected interim president by unanimous vote. Monthly meetings turned into block parties. Pat trained volunteers on how to read budgets and spot fraudulent filings. What once was Bryn's kingdom had become our classroom. The evening before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my garden, the rebuilt memorial where Harold's roses bloomed again. The air carried the faint scent of char and hope. Gavel brushed against my leg, purring softly. Tomorrow's the day, I whispered. Pat joined me, her silhouette framed by the porch light. You ready? I nodded. For the first time, yes, she smiled. Then let's finish this. The courthouse smelled of paper, polish, and nerves. Every seat was filled, neighbors from Pinewood, reporters, law students who'd camped outside just to watch a real-life lesson in accountability. Cameras waited beyond the marble steps, but inside, the air was sacredly still. I sat behind the prosecution table, not as a judge today, but as a witness. Across the aisle sat Bryn Ashworth Sterling, her beige prison suit traded for a stiff navy jacket that couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. Her lawyer whispered furiously. She stared ahead, unblinking, jaw locked, as if defiance could still change physics. When the clerk called the court to order, the gavel's echo rolled like thunder down the hallways. The federal seal glimmered above Judge Ramos's bench, a reminder that the law, once set in motion, belongs to no one's control. Prosecutor Amanda Stevens rose first. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her calm was a blade. Your Honor, the evidence before you tells a story of greed dressed as community. It tells how a woman built a small empire of fear and nearly ended a life to protect it. Screens flickered to life, drone images, night vision stills, body cam footage from Inspector Morrison. The jury leaned forward as the familiar scene played. Bryn kneeling in the dirt, silver canister glinting under moonlight. Gasps rippled through the gallery. For months, people had only read the headlines. Now they saw it, the moment her false kingdom turned to ash. Amanda paced slowly. The defendant didn't just break laws. She burned trust. She taught families to fear their own homes. Bryn's lawyer objected, but Judge Ramos merely raised an eyebrow. Overruled. Continue. When my name was called, the room seemed to inhale. Walking to the witness box felt like stepping through years of smoke. Amanda met my eyes. Judge Blackwood, you've spent your life upholding the law. Tell us, when did you realize the law needed to protect you? I breathed once, slow and steady, when the letters stopped sounding like regulations and started sounding like threats. When I saw fear replace kindness on my neighbors' faces, and when my cat almost died for standing on the wrong side of a fence. A faint murmur stirred in the gallery. I continued, voice even. She wanted silence. I gave her evidence instead. Amanda nodded. And why did you continue collecting that evidence after the first threat? Because I knew if I stopped, no one else would be safe. The screen behind me showed the map of other states, Phoenix, Sacramento, Detroit. A pattern of fire tracing one woman's greed. Bryn's attorney approached, rehearsed smile tight as wire. Judge Blackwood, isn't it true you were emotionally compromised? That your grief over your husband made you, shall we say, vindictive? The question hung like smoke. I leaned toward the microphone. My grief made me careful, not cruel. Vindictive people burn houses. Careful ones rebuild them. Even the court reporter paused before typing the line. The lawyer tried again. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted her intentions? I gestured to the screen frozen on the image of Bryn holding cash toward the inspector. You tell me. The courtroom laughed softly. The lawyer sat down. Next came the recordings. Pat Donnelly testified from the first row, narrating every operation detail, the sensors, the surveillance, the thermal mapping. She spoke with the quiet precision of someone who'd chased lies across decades. Then Inspector Morrison took the stand. He described the smell, the residue, the bribe. When the body cam footage replayed his voice, Ma'am, are you aware this is a federal offense? Bryn flinched so hard her pen clattered to the floor. The jury watched, mesmerized and horrified. One woman wiped her eyes. The foreman simply shook his head, muttering, Unbelievable. By mid-afternoon, the defense had run out of oxygen. Their last witness, a former board member trying to claim ignorance, crumbled under Amanda's questions. Every path led back to Bryn, her signatures, her payments, her orders. When it was Bryn's turn to testify, the room felt electric. Her lawyer advised against it, but pride is a louder voice than reason. She stood, shoulders squared, voice trembling between arrogance and desperation. I only wanted order, she began. People ignored the rules. Someone had to enforce them. Amanda folded her arms. By fire? Bryn's mask cracked. They laughed at me. They made the neighborhood ugly and her voice broke. And nobody cared until I fixed it. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. She realized too late she'd admitted everything but the word guilty. Amanda turned to the jury. You just heard her truth. Order in her mind meant control. And control built on fear always ends in flames. As the trial neared its end, Amanda stood once more. Her closing was simple, almost gentle. The law isn't a fence. It's a foundation. And when someone uses it to cage others, that foundation cracks. This case isn't about one neighborhood. It's about every place where power hides behind paperwork. Then she gestured toward me and the rows of neighbors behind me. These people rebuilt community out of ashes. They deserve peace. When she finished, you could hear the lights hum. Even Judge Ramos's gavel seemed softer when he announced recess. That evening, I walked home under a violet sky. Reporters shouted questions, but their words blurred into wind. At my gate, rebuilt, freshly painted, I paused. The wood was warm from the day's sun. It smelled of cedar, not smoke. Inside, the house was quiet except for the steady rhythm of gavels purring. Pat was there too, reading over paperwork by the lamp. You did good, she said without looking up. It's not over yet. She smiled. It is for her. The rest is paperwork. We sat in silence, two women bound by fire and justice, waiting for dawn to decide what history would write next. The courthouse doors opened at 9 sharp. Rain whispered across the marble steps like applause for the brave. Inside, the air buzzed, not loud, not chaotic, the charged silence of people about to witness history. On count 1, attempted murder of a federal official is guilty. Gasps. A sob. The sound of a pen dropping. Count 2, conspiracy to commit arson, the guilty. Count 3, wire and mail fraud, guilty. Each word landed like a heartbeat returning to life. By the time he reached identity theft and money laundering, even Bryn stopped pretending. Her chin sank to her chest. Judge Ramos adjusted his glasses. Members of the jury, thank you for your service. Mrs. Sterling, please stand. She obeyed slowly, the weight of a dozen lies pressing on her spine. For years you weaponized power meant for community. You turned law into leverage and kindness into currency. Today that power is revoked, he paused. Sentence: 25 years in federal custody, restitution to all known victims, and lifetime prohibition from any fiduciary or managerial role. The gavel fell once, clean as thunder. Outside, applause erupted. Inside, silence. Not out of shock, but reverence. When we stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds broke into ribbons of silver. Reporters surged forward, microphones flashing like sparks. Judge Blackwood, how does justice feel? One called. I smiled faintly. Like sunrise after a very long night. Pat laughed under her breath. You should trademark that. Walt, ever the teacher, lifted a hand toward the cameras. This isn't about revenge, he said. It's about remembering who the law belongs to. Us. The crowd cheered, not for a spectacle, but for closure. Months passed. Spring returned to Pinewood Estates. The charred soil healed green again. Children rode bikes down streets once patrolled by fear. The new HOA charter hung on the clubhouse wall, signed by every resident. Its first clause read simply, "No rule shall outweigh compassion." At each meeting, a chair sat empty at the head of the table, a reminder of what unchecked power costs. Pat visited often, though she refused every offer of credit. I'm retired, remember? She'd joke. Just a hobby now, busting tyrants. She helped set up a local watchdog group, the Pinewood Alliance for Fair Housing. They taught others how to read budgets, how to file FOI requests, how to fight back with facts instead of fear. One quiet evening, I returned to my garden. The roses Harold planted were in bloom, red as resolve, white as peace. I knelt, brushing dew from the petals, and whispered, "We made it, love." Justice bloomed again. Gavel curled beside me, his purr steady as a heartbeat. The night hummed with crickets, the soft rhythm of ordinary life restored. In the distance, laughter drifted from a backyard barbecue. Neighbors who once avoided each other now sharing food and music. That sound, I realized, was the true verdict. A month later, Washington called again. Congress had reviewed the Pinewood case. They invited me to testify before a committee drafting reforms to homeowner associations nationwide. The chamber was vast, cold, and full of cameras. But I spoke simply. We built these associations to protect homes, not to police souls. Power without empathy is just another form of fire. When I finished, the room stood in applause. Somewhere, I hoped Harold was smiling. Not because I'd won, but because I'd remembered why law exists. To guard the quiet corners of ordinary lives. Back in Pinewood, the sunset painted the rebuilt fences gold. Children chased fireflies. The old sign that once read Pinewood Estates, a community of perfection, had been replaced again. Pat leaned on the railing beside me, arms crossed. You ever think of writing this down? She asked. I smiled. Maybe someday. For now, I just want to live in the story's ending. She nodded toward the horizon. Not an ending, Judge, a sequel. The wind carried the scent of roses and rain. Somewhere a door slammed, laughter followed, and life continued. Imperfect, unpredictable, beautifully human. Voiceover closes. In every neighborhood, there's a gate that guards more than property. It guards dignity. And sometimes all it takes to open it again is one person brave enough to hold the line. Music swells. A slow piano over the sound of evening crickets and distant thunder fading to calm. The end.